Like I mentioned in the Vulpix Care Guide, canine Pokemon are usually very easy to care for. Sure, there are some that can give you trouble, like the aforementioned Vulpix and the Houndour line, but usually canine Pokemon are the ones that people look for when they're getting a family Pokemon. Something that's easy to train, isn't dangerous to keep around, and that you can form a very close bond with very easily. After all, there is a reason that dogs are the most popular kind of Pokemon pets around. Depending on what region you're in, the most popular lines could be the Lillipup line in the Unova region, or the Yamper line in Galar, or even the Electrike line in Hoenn. But in Kanto, Johto, and even here in Sinnoh, the major competitor for top family dog is the Growlithe line. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through and figure out how you would raise and care for different Pokemon lines in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the fiery dog Pokemon Growlithe and its speedy evolution Arcanine. Growlithe itself is a medium-sized orange dog, standing around 2 foot 4 inches tall and averaging around 42 pounds. It has a mainly orange body with large tufts of light-colored fur on its chest, tail, and head, along with black stripes that go across its back. When it gets exposed to a firestone, the Growlithe will then evolve into its much larger evolution, Arcanine, exploding up in size. The average Arcanine stands over 6 feet tall, standing over many humans, and weighing over 340 pounds, which is quite frankly an incredibly big Pokemon. But don't let the size fool you. The entire line is beloved the world over because of how friendly and loyal they are to those that they bond with. So, without further ado, let's get into it and see if these Pokemon could be the perfect Pokemon partners for you and your family. Enclosure. The really nice part about these Pokemon are that they're really great house pets. Well, maybe not Arcanine due to its size, but the fact that its size is what limits it and not its temperament is astounding, especially since these are fire-type Pokemon. Normally, with fire types like this, you have to keep them outside due to open flames on their bodies, or the fact that they give off enough heat passively that they'll set anything flammable ablaze. Not so with these guys. These Pokemon are not prone to releasing their flames unless they feel threatened or scared. And even then, many years of being bred and raised by humans has really conditioned the entire species to be very receptive to training, making it very easy to have them learn that they can only use fire on command. You still hear the occasional story of someone getting really burned by Growlithe fire, but that's usually either because the Pokemon itself was still young and not used to having people around, or it was being mistreated, which in that case, those people deserve it. But anyway, yes, you can absolutely keep these Pokemon in your home with you, and you shouldn't have any kinds of problems as long as they're well trained, which if you get one from a breeder, then they should come pre-trained. However, due to Arcanine's size, it can be difficult for most people to keep them safely in their homes. So I'm going to be giving you an outside enclosure setup for Arcanine itself, along with the inside enclosure setup for it. That way, if you have the space to accommodate it, you can, but you also have the option of keeping it outside if you want to. And the outside enclosure would also work for you if you want to keep your Growlithe outside as well. But for now, let's get into things that you'll need to keep these Pokemon effectively. One of the major things that you'll need is going to be a crate. This is very important as this will be pulling double duty as the place where you put your new Growlithe when you can't focus on them and you don't trust them to be on their own just yet in your house, and it'll eventually become your Pokemon's safe space, almost like their own room. Eventually, you'll notice that they go in there just to hang out and take a nap. Trust me when I say that it'll become your Pokemon's favorite spot in your house. Now, one for Growlithe will be fairly easy to get a hold of, as they aren't too big of a Pokemon. But getting one for Arcanine might be kinda tough. They do make them, due to the popularity of these species, but you have to recognize that the crate for an Arcanine is going to be nearly the size of a horse stall. So whatever room you set it up in, that's going to be the Arcanine's room pretty much. Just be aware of that. Aside from the crate, you'll also need to get a bunch of smaller stuff as well. Things like collars, leashes, poop bags to clean up after them, a food and water bowl, ceramic, and plenty of toys. And really, that's it for an inside enclosure. These Pokemon are really a very easy inside setup. Now, when it comes to an outside enclosure, like I said, Arcanine takes up almost as much space as a horse. In fact, I think they might be bigger than the average Rapidash. But either way, they're gonna need a lot of space. Luckily, if you follow the training in this guide and teach your Pokemon good recall skills before you evolve them, then you don't need a secondary fence to keep them contained. You can just have a shelter for them to sleep and escape from bad weather in. For something of Arcanine's size, you'll be looking at something that's around the size of 8 feet by 8 feet. That'll provide plenty of space for your Pokemon to spread out if they want to, while not being so big that it takes up a large portion of your yard. Just be sure that it's insulated from the weather. That way they have a place to go when it gets too cold or too hot out. Though, thanks to their fire typing, neither condition should really be a bother to them too much. Either way, one of the walls should have a ceiling-to-floor heavy-duty rubber flap that'll help keep things like rain and snow out of the room, but will also allow easy access to and from the building for your Pokemon. Then, be sure to provide a large water dish or bucket for them to drink out of, and plenty of bedding. That way, they aren't just sleeping on the cold ground. After all, even Pokemon don't like to sleep on the cold, hard ground. When you're looking at other Pokemon that can be housed with your Growlithe evolution, then really you'll have to look at whether the other Pokemon are going to be the problem. Growlithe and Arcanine are so trainable that they could really be housed with any Pokemon that you want. Now, do keep in mind they are still fire types, so grass, bug, fairy, and steel types might not be the best idea, but as long as those Pokemon are even-tempered and your Growlithe Pokemon is well-trained, then you really shouldn't have any problems. Same with water types. So long as the water type is calm and doesn't pick the fight first, then you should be good to keep them in close proximity. Though, if you are keeping your Growlithe in your house, then that's going to be a major limiting factor to begin with. After all, you can't really keep a lot of the big Pokemon or many of the different types in your own home. I will say that they do really well with other canine Pokemon. So if you decide you want to get another one for your home, then I would recommend a Lillipup, another Growlithe, or even a Rockruff. But be aware that the latter one of those can be more of a challenge to train due to the stubborn streak they can develop. Availability. Arcanine is almost unheard of in the wild. Since they're a stone evolution, that means that the only way for a wild Growlithe to evolve is to get lucky and find one. They don't really live in places where firestones are common, and they don't really have any way to actively seek them out. So if you're just looking to go right for an Arcanine, then I'd suggest looking into breeders. Growlithe too is surprisingly rare in the wild, though nowhere near as rare as Arcanine. They only appear on a few routes throughout the different regions, though Hoenn is the only one that doesn't have a natural population at all. They're most common in Galar and Paldea, where they appear in many different places, but in their home region of Kanto, they only show up on routes 7 and 8 surrounding Saffron City. The same with Johto, where they're only on the routes between Jubilife and Ecruteak City. In Sinnoh, they have been rarely sighted around Sandgem Town, and Melee Island has some on its northern edge in Alola. I should also mention that these Pokemon have a tendency to also take up residency in old abandoned buildings and places like that. Like the big mansion that's on Cinnabar Island in Kanto and the Verbank complex in Unova. I'm not sure why they do this. Maybe it's the fact that these Pokemon have been so tied to humanity for so long that they just have a natural inclination to inhabit our old structures. Or it could be that it's just safer for them than the outdoors. Either way, you should not go hunting for them in these places. Those old, falling apart places can be dangerous and collapse around you without warning. In fact, if you do go out hunting for one of these wild Pokemon, be careful. Human race ones are great Pokemon, and they will be super friendly, but wild ones won't have that same disposition. they can be fairly vicious, so if you're going to be taking one from the wild, be ready for a Pokemon battle. Luckily, there are tons of breeders out there that raise and sell these Pokemon. Thanks to the massive popularity of these Pokemon as working Pokemon and as house pets, a lot of breeders sell Growlithe. Just a quick search online and you could get into contact with a reputable breeder near you in a matter of minutes. The nice part is that, since they're raised by a human, they'll be a lot friendlier than a wild-caught one. And most breeders will pre-train them on fire usage, so you don't have to worry about that either. Sure, it might be more expensive than just buying a Pokeball and catching one, but in my mind, it's very worth the investment. Plus, if you are one of those people that just wants an Arcanine right away, you can find breeders that are willing to sell you one of those as well. Or even breeders that are willing to make special arrangements to evolve the Growlithe that you picked out. Normally, that's where my availability section would end. But when she found out that I was working on the Growlithe care guide, the woman that trained and gave me Booster, my Houndoom, wanted me to mention her care center. Her name is Rebecca, and she's an ex-Pokemon Ranger that runs a fire Pokemon sanctuary on the side of the Coronet Mountain Range, east of Eterna City. There, she takes in abused and abandoned fire-type Pokemon and rehabilitates them, getting them ready to trust people again and getting them ready to be adopted to good homes. She wanted me to mention that she has a few Growlithe that are up for adoption right now, and if you're in the area and interested, then to head east of Eterna City, down Route 211, and as you're approaching Mount Coronet, you'll notice there's a sign off the main road for Smoking Tails Rehabilitation Center. Head up the driveway, it'll take you up the side of the mountain, and you should eventually come to a parking lot with a building in it. The front desk staff should be able to help you from there. So yeah, if you're in the area and you want a Growlithe, then there's a few that are ready for adoption and a good home right now. And I can personally vouch for the care and effort that Rebecca puts into making sure that these Pokemon are well trained and going to good homes. Booster was my first Pokemon to help me out around the farm, and he is absolutely wonderful. I wouldn't trade him for anything. Care. As I've mentioned multiple times throughout this guide, training is going to be a big part of caring for these guys, as it is with any canine Pokemon. Without that training, they can become real pains in the neck, but I'm not going to give you a complete in-depth training guide. There's a lot that you can do with these guys, from working on a farm like my Booster, to contests, to just a lot of neat tricks. The possibilities are endless. So instead of making this a 2-hour guide about every little thing you can do, I'm going to instead just teach you the essential basics: house training, crate training, and recall training. House training, I'm sure, is the one that you're looking forward to the most. After all, nobody wants their Pokemon going to the bathroom in their living room. So the best way to do this is through repetition. After bringing your Pokemon home, you want to take them out about once every hour. Whether that be on a leash or out in your yard, it doesn't matter, but your goal is to get them to go to the bathroom outside. If they don't, stand there with them for 10 to 15 minutes, then bring them back inside. Now you take them out every 20 minutes until they eventually do go to the bathroom outside. When they do, you tell them good boy or good girl, and you give them a treat. You're essentially praising and rewarding the act of going to the bathroom outside. Then, when they're done, clean up after them if you have to, and bring them inside. After that, it's just rinse and repeat. It sounds simple, and it really is, but it's going to take months to get this down. And in those months, there's going to be long periods of frustration where the Pokemon looks directly at you and then goes to the bathroom on your floor. It's going to be irritating, trust me. But keep at it, and over time, your Pokemon will begin to realize that they only get rewarded for going to the bathroom outside. And then they'll start to let you know when they have to go so you can let them out. Never stop giving them the praise, always tell them good boy or good girl, but over time you can also start to roll back the treats so that you don't have to reward them every time they go. The next training that you should look at is crate training. You should use the crate for a few reasons. One is that it prevents untrained Pokemon from making a mess of your house while you're away. So if they aren't housebroken yet, then the crate can help keep them from going while you're away. Second is that it can also help your Pokemon settle down if they get too wild and start getting overstimulated. The crate is a place that can help settle them down and maybe take a nap. And lastly is that putting them in the crate can be very helpful when you're busy doing something and can't keep both eyes on your new Pokemon, like when you're cooking or doing laundry. So, how do you do this? Start by setting up the crate in a place that your Pokemon's going to be very often, whether that be the bedroom, the living room, or some other room in your house that they're going to be very often. And then after that, just let your Pokemon explore the crate a little bit. Throw some treats in there, throw some toys in there, get them to go in and explore the crate without closing the door. Heck, you could even do what I do with Booster and feed him in his crate. Then, once they spend some time exploring the crate, you're going to shut the door on them. This isn't the important part. You have to ignore them. If they're new to this, they are not going to like being put in the crate. They're going to bark and whine and make a fuss because you shut them in there. You have to ignore them. Walk away from the crate, sit down on the couch, don't look at them. They need to understand that making that kind of fuss in their crate isn't going to get them anything. But you do have to keep an eye on them. If there's any break in the barking, even if it's just for 1 second, stand up, praise them, and give them a treat. This is to show that when they don't make a fuss in their crate, they get rewarded, and that being settled in the crate is a good thing. And then, to let them out, wait for a moment when they're quiet, reward them for it, and then open the crate. And then immediately take them outside to use the bathroom, because they probably have to after all that. Over time, with this training, your Pokemon should become more comfortable in the crate and may even come to see it as their space. The barking and carrying on should stop, and you should have no problem getting them to go into their crate on command. A few small details when talking about crate training. I wouldn't provide your Pokemon with water in their crate right away, not unless you know they're going to be in there for a long period of time, and they've been trained not to go inside their crate. Speaking of which, getting the right sized crate for your Pokemon is very important. You obviously don't want something too small, but getting something too big could be bad too, as your Pokemon may be tempted to use the bathroom in something that has too much space for them. And lastly is that you should never, ever use the crate as a punishment. This will leave negative impressions of the crate in your Pokemon's mind, and they will never willingly go into the crate. It just makes your life a lot harder when you have to chase your Pokemon down to get them to go into their crate because they think they're being punished. Now for the last and most important bit of training. Recall training is the ability to get your Pokemon to come to you with just one word during any situation. This is the most important one because it can really help you in emergencies. For example, if you need to get your Pokemon out of a dangerous battle or situation, then you can use the recall command to get them out of it. So the way we're going to start this is on leash. Be sure that you have your Pokemon's favorite treats ready. Wait for your Pokemon to get distracted by something other than yourself, and then call their name and say whatever command word you want to use. I personally use the word come for Booster, but I've also heard people say here and approach. Just be sure to say it loud and clearly, whatever it is. Then start backpedaling away from your Pokemon. I know, this may seem counterintuitive, but this is another thing to help your Pokemon focus on you, and the backward movement is more likely to get them to come toward you. As soon as they start coming towards you, praise them with a good job, and give them the treat when they reach you. It's very simple, but again, this is the most important command that you can teach your Pokemon. When they start to reliably listen to your command, then I want you to get one of the flexi leashes. You know, one of the ones that stretch for like 30 feet or so. Allow your Pokemon to get farther away from you than they have been, and then try to call them back. Same thing, praise them as soon as they start moving toward you, and then give them the treat when they reach you. Right now, we're just testing the boundaries of how far they can be from you and still listen to the command. Once they reliably respond to the command on the flexi leash, then it's time to add in distractions. It could be other people, other Pokemon, food that's left out, things like that that can grab your Pokemon's attention and try and divert them from you when you give the command. You're still going to try and get them to come to you, and you want them to ignore the distractions. This can be kind of tricky, and depending on your Pokemon's personality, then they may never truly be able to ignore those distractions, but you have to try, as this is, again, one of the most important things you can learn. But something to keep in mind is that this command should always be accompanied by treats every single time you use it. That way, the Pokemon knows that if they respond to this command, they will be getting a reward. And a command that is always associated with food will have a lot more priority than any other command that you can give them. Speaking of food, the Growlithe line are omnivores, but they do tend to lean more towards the carnivore side of the spectrum. This means that with a natural diet, you'll be feeding them plenty of raw meat, mixed with a few veggies, berries, eggs, and organs. Yes, organs. Now, that last part might startle a few people, as we haven't used organs in a dish so far. But for canines specifically, the organs hold a lot of necessary nutrients and vitamins that they need, so we have to throw them in, specifically the liver, the spleen, and the kidneys. The best kind of meat and organs to get is poultry, so P-dove or Pidgey. The veggies and berries can really be anything that's in season at the time, but you should avoid giving your Growlithe onions or grappa berries, as they're not good for them. Now, the recipe that I use for Booster is this: 16 pounds of ground poultry, 2 1/4 pound organ meat, 2 1/4 pound of veggies, a handful of bulk berries, and 4 Pidgey eggs, shell and all. I then vigorously mix it all together and freeze the whole thing. I then pull out however much I need to thaw out and serve it to Booster in that day. You could do the exact same with your Growlithe or Arcanine, just of course in different amounts than I feed Booster. Based on the weight and fire typing, Growlithe would get about 2 1/4 pounds of food a day, divided between a morning and nighttime meal. Not too bad, as the batch that I just described should last you about 8 or 9 days. The crazy part comes with Arcanine. Remember, the average Arcanine weighs around 340 pounds. That's a lot of Pokemon, especially to have a Fire-type Pokemon. This means that they are going to be eating near 16 pounds of food a day between their 2 meals. That's insane. That means that one batch of the recipe that I just described will last you about a day. You better be ready to spend some serious time and money on just the food for that massive dog. Now that we've covered the major things about care, I'm just going to rattle off a few minor things that you'll have to do for these Pokemon. Exercise is a must, so daily walks will have to be a thing. Just be sure to train Growlithe well on a leash, otherwise you may end up with an Arcanine that'll drag you down the street. And Arcanine are very, very fast, and so no one wants to be dragged behind them because you will be torn to shreds. As well, grooming is going to be a major thing with these Pokemon. These Pokemon have big tufts of long fur, and things can get caught in it or it can get matted really easily. Brushing that every day will help take care of that, and also act as another bonding exercise for you and your Pokemon. Looking at the food and water bowls, you're going to want to get ceramic ones. With the heat that these Pokemon can give off, plastic will melt and metal will simply conduct the heat and cook the food and water. And lastly, just be sure to spend some time with them, whether that be just hanging out with them, playing with them, exercising with them, whatever. The Growlithe line and canine Pokemon in general just bond with people so deeply. Be sure to spend some time with them and show them that you care for them just as much as they care for you. Cost. Funny enough, the Enclosure might just be the cheapest part of caring for these Pokemon. For Growlithe, keeping it in the house really brings down the price to the low category, since you're really only buying small things here and there. Arcanine might jump you up to the high category with its outside building, but it really shouldn't be too much compared to some of the other Enclosures we've talked about. the Pokemon itself as well is going to be fairly cheap. Getting a Growlithe from a breeder shouldn't cost you more than the moderate category, unless you're looking for a really prestigious breed that has a lot of contest winners and stuff like that in it. Arcanine is going to bump you up to the high category due to the price of the Firestone, but that's just the reality of stone evolutions. The food, though, that's going to be a lot. Growlithe is in the high category due to the amount of meat that you have to buy per month. Not great, but still not the worst that we've seen. I can't say the same for Arcanine. Just the sheer amount that it's going to eat daily means that you're going to be looking deep in the very high category. And again, it's all because of the meat that it eats. If these guys were vegetarians, I mean, the cost still wouldn't be great, but it's nowhere near where it is now. And as I always say, this is the reality of a lot of fully evolved Pokemon. They're hard to care for. Conclusion. I love canine Pokemon. When I went to Rebecca's Fire-type Sanctuary and saw a booster there, I immediately fell in love. And a lot of people feel the same way, and it's for good reason. As you just heard, the Growlithe line are very friendly, loyal, and make great, caring, easy-to-keep pets. Despite being a fire type, I couldn't recommend this line more for families and really for anyone. That's not to say they don't have their downsides. Arcanine is massive and takes a lot to care for, and the whole line can get rather defensive towards those they don't know, but as long as you stick with the training and only evolve them if you're sure you can take care of them, then this could easily be the perfect Pokemon partners for you or really anyone. Thank you all for tuning in, and please join us again next time when we cover the water tadpole Pokemon Poliwag and its evolutions Poliwhirl, Poliwrath, and Politoed. Have a wonderful night, everyone.